Alright, so I'm not here today to give a full review of this movie. I thought it was a very good movie, a great science fantasy movie, a decent Star Wars movie, but a terrible middle installment for a trilogy. Today I will explain and analyze the biggest problem I had with The Last Jedi. First, let me tell you what I thought worked in the movie to provide contrast for my later points. By the way, there will be spoilers here. 1. I thought the overall philosophy of the future of the series was well intentioned and actually smart. Ironically enough, the decision to kill Snoke was a great move, and the whole Rey's parents aren't important so stop worrying about it thing was a stroke of brilliance. I think letting Luke go was a good move, even though I think its function in the movie and for the future of the franchise was totally misguided. I'll get to that later. 2. I think the performances were very good for the most part. No truly weak ones in my opinion. 3. I think the storyline was a unique blend of Return of the Jedi and Battlestar Galactica. It really had nothing to do with Empire, and I think that was done intentionally. 4. I think there were 3 very good storylines in the movie. In ranking them, I must say that the tightest storyline for me was actually the main Resistance storyline featuring Poe. I thought his arc was the least vague and had the strongest through line and ultimately had a beginning, middle, and end. And while there were some conveniences here and there and some tonal issues, why Holdo didn't just tell Poe the plan was beyond me. I think the story, despite what other reviewers say, is actually the strongest in the film. Next, I think the Rey and Kylo storyline was the next best storyline. While chiefly a character examination for the two of them, I thought the connection between the two of them brought on by Snoke was a great addition to the story. In my opinion, this part of the story was the most human and leads to a great climax. The reason I don't put it on the top of my list is I feel the story was an aside, inconsequential for the future. While it does wipe Snoke off the map and deliver a complete reframing of Rey's backstory, it also puts Rey in the position in terms of Jedi that wasn't really the case before. But the problem with it is that it's far too open-ended to be the best storyline in the movie. And it kind of undercuts a little bit of the conflict going in with both of these characters. They essentially resolve all their issues. They don't change in terms of what they want. In fact, they're more hardened in their goals and aims, that any type of conflict with, the light side for Kylo or the dark side for Rey in the future movies ring redundant, in my opinion. And that's why I put this storyline as the second best. By the way, this movie did a much better job at making Rey seem more believable. While she's still really overpowered, and no story explanation is going to make me change my opinion on that, she doesn't come off as a Mary Sue in this one, which is good. I actually like her better in this movie than in the last one. The last good storyline in my ranking was the Luke one. This thread was executed well, but was more about Luke's damaged temperament than it was about the story at hand. As a result, I feel that they wasted a lot of time on the island, which didn't result in Rey learning anything new. Ultimately, I think that it sort of led to a waste of Luke's character by leading him down the textbook path of sacrifice instead of utilizing him to set up the next generation. Once again, it was good execution, but ultimately inconsequential for everything except Luke's character. And evidence of this is basically the pretty much inevitability that Luke is going to show up in the next movie. If Luke provided a good service to this film and to the future of the franchise, I'm talking about in terms of the way he was used, then his returning in the next film would be needless. But, he's probably going to be there. Alright, gotta find my place. So, did you notice something? I ranked these based off of their importance and their impact on the overall trilogy. The reason I listed the Resistance storyline as number 1 is because I felt it had the most impact for the future and had the largest consequences for the next installment. While I think Rey, Luke, and Kylo's storyline may be more important to the overall philosophy of the franchise, they do a disservice to Episode 9 in some key ways. That leads me to my biggest problem with the film. But before I get into that, there's another storyline in Last Jedi that I didn't mention, the Rose and Finn storyline. This to me is a symptom of the largest problem with the 8th episode of the saga. Let me explain why. Finn and Rose's storyline is a C-plot, a subsidiary, I'm not really sure if I'm using that word in the right context, a subsidiary of the Resistance storyline, which is fine in of itself. But there's a real problem here. Finn was set up as a co-protagonist in The Force Awakens, alongside with Rey, and essentially drives the Force Awakens story. I mean, actually, pay attention to The Force Awakens. He's the one making the real decisions here. I mean, sure, Rey pulled the lightsaber out of the snow and had some crazy visions, but ultimately it was Finn's choices throughout the entire movie that drove the entire film. Indeed, he gets a fair amount of time in this movie, The Last Jedi I'm talking about. But this time is essentially busy work, with an unestablished character, albeit a very good character in Rose Tico. By the way, it's Rose who frankly benefits more from Finn than he does her in this film. Just to say that. Finn's arc is egregious in its lack of value to the character, the story, and the overall trilogy. In fact, I think, in my opinion, the whole point of the storyline was to hitch him to Rose so that he'd be less involved with Rey, and therefore less involved with the core storyline. A demotion, if you will. Now, why they would do that? Just use your imagination. I have my theories. He was better off left in a coma, in my opinion. That's what I think. His treatment was a waste. It did nothing but keep a very good movie from being a great movie by padding out the story, because oddly enough, even though the character Finn seems to be given the least amount of care in the film, he still manages to get a lot of screen time, which boggles my mind. The change he experiences is only a slight alteration of his priorities, so subtle you barely notice it. And even his setup for the next film is completely non-existent. While Poe is the new leader of the Resistance, especially now that Carrie Fisher is no longer with us. She did a great job in this movie, by the way. And while Kylo is essentially Commodus of the First Order, which I'm excited to see. And Rey is now the founder, or going to be the founder of the new Jedi Order. Finn is just a guy who might have a new girlfriend. And this sucks because his actor, John Boyega, can do way more with the Finn character than what he's allowed to do in this so-called crucial movie in his development. And it seems as if the development and the setup for his character in The Force Awakens are wasted in this movie, and deliberately so. Like I said, I think there's some reasons why, and I'm not going to get into that. Use your imagination. And therein lies the problem with this film. It cares far more about reframing the path of The Force Awakens than it does about providing material for the next movie. The movie burns every old bridge, but does nothing but put all the new materials near the shore. Even some of the new materials, like Finn, they leave on the truck. Let me go down a list of all the areas where I think the film dropped the ball for the future. First, I think Poe is the only character who actually grows in this film. Like, sure, Rey's resolve kind of hardens. Kylo's resolve kind of hardens. And they have new insight on each other. But they don't really change. I mean, the biggest change with Rey, and I'm not really reading on the script right now, the biggest change with Rey is the realization that her parents didn't really matter. Yeah, and they never really did in the film. Even in the past film, the parents really didn't matter. They kind of throw hints that they might matter, but ultimately they were non-crucial. And that doesn't really change in this film, and that doesn't really change, and that's not going to change in the next film unless they do something about it. But anyway, so yeah, Poe is the only character that really grows in this film. As in, like, he's one way and then he becomes another way. The conflict between Rey and Kylo is largely resolved in this film. And neither of them change their minds, which I alluded to in the first point. Neither of them really change their minds going forward, and barely have even any motivation now. I mean, I guess Rey's motivation might be, she wants to establish a new family or whatever, or to protect her family. But that's kind of vague. And Kylo's motivation, I guess, would be just rage at not getting his way. I don't know. It's just vague. It's just unclear. Finn's place in the story isn't even considered in the future at all, and his bond with Rey, the foundation of The Force Awakens, is undermined. Old mysteries are thrown away, which is fine by me, but there are no new mysteries. No new mysteries are established. Luke was wasted on a cliched yet epic sacrifice. but he really didn't do much in guiding and directing the path of the future Jedi, which to me is a disappointment. And lastly, the setup is far too open-ended. While I think it's good that they burned a lot of the old bridges and foundations, they didn't do anything to set up, which I'm kind of repeating myself now, but that's the point. They didn't really do anything to set up the direction. Yeah, each character besides Finn has a role, but we don't really know where they're going to do with the role. And the resistance is so small that it's kind of hard to wrap your mind around what direction they can go next. Now, with my major and final point, I get the sense that this movie attempts to be the alpha and omega of the Star Wars universe, because it feels like a beginning and end for the trilogy. It comes across as if it knows better the direction of the franchise than anyone else. It marches along like an easily distracted toddler, complete with a weak grip on the ball it was entrusted. The Last Jedi is manipulative in the fact that it hides behind postmodernism, metafiction, and misdirection in an effort to shift away from The Force Awakens and discourage speculation, all while doing nothing to build anything new, or to even care for its new toys and inherit it. I'm talking about Finn. It's self-involved, short-sighted, and frankly, even a bit hubristic, which is ironic considering its theme, in its complete reframing of the story. But like a hot-headed teenager bucking against the established order, which is not wrong in of itself, it has no plans or ideas of its own. Just a box of matches. It torches everything, even at the expense of the future of its supposed core characters, and it ultimately comes across as a wasted second installment. I mean, think about it, how much time and effort they're going to have to put into the third installment to make this a cohesive story. Think about it. And this is incredibly ironic coming from a movie that's supposedly about making a way for the next generation. And that is my biggest problem with Star Wars The Last Jedi. All that being said, I don't want people to think I didn't like the movie. I liked it quite a bit. But come on, Disney. Don't waste our time.